Let's see, and he got
Starting to
started.
get away from me, though. That's the problem.
Good afternoon. It's now 5:30. I'll call the April 13th, 2026 Calhoun County Council meeting to order. Ms. Bonnet, would you give us the nation, please, ma'am?
Let us pray. Dear Lord, we thank you for the opportunity to serve the community. Please grant us wisdom to make decisions that are fair. Help us to listen to each other's respect and keep the needs of the citizens first. Amen.
Amen.
Have a motion for approval of the agenda.
So moved. Second.
Probably moving second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed likewise. Ayes have it. Let me just, Richard, while Richard's getting that, see if we have any public comments. We want to engage. I don't know if some people may not be familiar with our procedure, but we don't engage with doing the public comment. We will hear you. And if you have anything you'd like, that's what we have Richard down here for. You can come back with him and he'll, or either the council will brief you at the next meeting, but we will not engage with anyone doing the public comments. It's just to hear what you're thinking and where you're at. Richard, do we have anybody?
No, sir, we don't.
No public comments. We have a motion for approval of the minutes,
So moved.
March 23rd.
Second.
Properly moving second. Any additions or corrections? Hearing none, all in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed likewise, the ayes have it. Mr. Brockington, is he?
He's coming in right now.
Walking
There
in
he
here.
is.
Just in time. You got the podium, Mr. Brockington. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Or eat up 2 minutes. I'll start at 6. 5:30. 5:30, my apologies.
That's all right, fine,
Please,
fine.
please accept my apologies. I want to thank you for allowing me to speak tonight. It's a pleasure to be here. Such a beautiful day, everyone. My name is Robert Brockington. I'm your elected clerk of court, and I want to talk a little bit about the first year. The first year here is my job as the clerk of court, and coming in, I was, straight up. I come from an aviation background, and I just thought a lot about this job, things I wanted to do. So I want to talk a little bit about the first year. I want to start with the accomplishments. I came in and I built a strong rapport with many of the state and county entities. For example, the county library, and I'll explain that in a little bit, Sumter County, and other clerks of courts around the state. I've really been in contact with them. They've helped me. I've actually passed on some good ideas to them, and I've received a lot of good ideas from them as well. And then the county treasury, we work well together here. We save money by making court operations more efficient over there. And some of the things that we've done is a smart board. The state wants to see our old-timey courthouses to be more modernized. And I don't want to make this old-timey courthouse into a big old showroom with, smart boards and all this stuff hanging on the wall. And some people, the solicitor said, well, Bob, how did you come up with this idea? We've got a portable smart board over there. Well, some people use the bathroom. They're sitting and thinking, and some are sitting and stinking. Well, I am sitting and thinking. My wife will tell you otherwise. I went to the library and working with those guys, fantastic folks. They have 3 smart boards. So instead of me putting money into the budget to buy a smart board, I just sign it out of the library just like I do a book. I'm the only one, as far as I know, in this county that can do that. And our maintenance folks move it. All I have to do is send a request in, and they come over there and they move that board over. And when I finish, we check it back into the library and get it out of there. Also went and spent $250, and I got a document camera. So now you can plug it into the smart board, you stick a document under it, and everybody, the jury, judge, everyone in the courtroom can actually see this here old document. So now they're really happy that we're up into, they like practicing law in our courtroom because it's an old-timey courtroom, and it just brings back memories for some of them. But it also, it brings them up to where they enjoy being in there, because now you're not writing stuff on easels and everything. We're holding a court tomorrow, the first murder trial that we've held here in a long time. And they're just excited about presenting their evidence the way they're going to present it. So we're moving along on that. We're moving into the 21st century with an old 18th century building. We're doing the best we can. I've started paying our jurors with debit cards, okay? It would take anywhere from $6 to $7 to cut a check, go through the number of entities that had to sign off on it, and mail it out, and then, of course, having problems with it coming back. So now we check them in with our computer. We shoot them, we shoot the debit card, and we shoot their, they have a barcode with their name. And it's all built into the system. And the debit card, after the end of the week is over, Friday, I will activate it. It'll take me about 1 minute. Activate it, and it'll pay them all every day that they've went and been there and done it. It costs 63 cents per card to do that. So we've saved $6 to $7 just by going through that system. And other counties use this system, the bigger counties, and it works great for us. So we're saving a lot of money in that area right there. I stabilized the staff positions and conducted training with Sumter County when I first came on board, because we do, last year we did absolutely no trials. So myself and my bailiff went over to Sumter County and we sat through a trial from selecting the jury right on down to the verdict. Learned so much, and it paid dividends today. We seated our jury by 10:30. And that's what hiccups that we had no control over, like a pleading that came in. I had to send them all over to the library, and it worked great. Also, I was to stabilize the staff positions. We had to hire 2 new staff members and bring them in. We took them over to Sumter and got some training, got some pointers, and then brought them back, and we worked on our system here. And then Sumter came over and evaluated us. I asked them to come do that, and they did, and we learned some things from that. First thing we learned is we got an outstanding staff over there. They are fantastic. And each one of them, to the person, is doing the job equivalent to the 3. So our general sessions clerk, they have 3 in Sumter, and she's doing the amount of work that at least 3 of them are doing, and she's doing it well. Same with our family court clerk. She is just outstanding. People are calling from all around the state for assistance, and it's come that way with that. It's same with same with our staff member over in the civil side of it. Very, very good reputation, does a great job. Our staff is outstanding. But to help them, we reorganized the filing system over there, got rid of all those filing cabinets that we had over there, decluttered the office. So it looks more like a more professional building, a more professional office over there. And then we upgraded their staff computers. We got them with 2 screens now. It makes it a lot easier to work the computer system, meaning the courts management system. There's a lot of data, a lot of windows that have to be open at the same time. So instead of having 1 computer, now we got 1 monitor, we've got 2 monitors, and we're getting a lot more done a lot quicker, okay? We streamlined our banking account and procedures with the county treasurer. And this is where I've got all the bank accounts now in 1 bank. We're not in 2 different banks. We have the I-26 system that's going on out there, where I had to account for just under $1 million worth of money that is given to us to hold until we have gotten them all done, except there's 2 more left, 2 more projects left that have to be settled with the South Carolina Department of Transportation. It has to be adjudicated. And then we've got 3 persons that are deceased, and we cannot find their family members. So I have to hold on to that money for another 3 years before I can turn it over to the unclaimed property for the state, which is what we're going to have to do. So having it all in 1 pool, having it all in 1 bank makes it much more efficient. Our end of month reporting and payment transfer is completely automatic. I send it over digitally. She checks what she has to check. We agree on the money that's needing to be transferred. I give her the go, and Alicia clicks a few buttons, boom, moves the money over. Nobody's writing checks. And then she sends me a confirmation of that. I have it on file in paper, and I have it on file in digital over there. So we're meeting all the requirements there. Our end of month report for general sessions last month, we came in the first day at work, and we had it done within 2 hours. I mean, confirmation, money transferred, everything. So that's how efficient we've really become with that. Whereas before, we were looking at the 10th of the month before any kind of money was actually being moved. and then I'll talk about consolidating the banks. Now, let's talk about the projects in progress and projected in the near future. And I don't know if you've heard about this, but if anybody's been hanging around me for the last 2 or 3 months have heard about this. Delinquent court fees and fines. This county and this state is owed right here in Calhoun County $1.78 million in fees and fines that have not been paid. I'll say that again, $1.78 million. Just under $1.8 million is what's owed to us over there. Well, I put a system in place and to start collecting this money on March the 1st. One or two things is going to happen, according to my wife, is either I'm going to be assassinated or I'm going to be reelected. I don't know which is worse. However, we put it in place March 1st, and as of 10 minutes ago, I just pulled it up. We've collected $18,951.46. Part of that is because I'm taking debit cards now. I'll take debit cards and I'll take credit. A lot of folks are electing to just pay the full amount. A lot of people owe $128.76 or 75 cents, excuse me, or the $168.75. And there's some people who owe $103, and then there's other people that owe a lot. But a lot of those smaller numbers are just being paid all at once, and it's not costing the county anything. We have a surcharge on it at 2%. Okay, so anytime they do that, a lot of folks are walking in and paying. We have a gentleman. I just wanted to hug him. He's owed a lot of money for a long time, over $20,000 he owes. He went to prison for a little bit. He came back. He still owes us money. He came in, sat with me, and said, "Mr. Bob, I don't want you to put me in jail. So is it okay if we do a payment plan?" Which I do a payment plan over there. I don't charge him interest. He comes in every month and pays $100. Now, he and I both will be deceased before it's paid off, I'm sure. But the good part is he's a good person. He paid his dues. Now he's paying his fines and his fees. It'll take him a while, but he's paying it. And other people are too. But I've had the whole gamut run where folks are cursing me. They're cursing the lady on the phone, and right on to the point where they're going to get a lawyer and talk to him about that, or him or her about that. So I've spoken to lawyers. I've spoken to folks that are angry with me. I've spoken to folks that tell me, and this is the common thread, I just didn't know. And I believe it because I watch folks walk into that courthouse, and it's going to happen Friday. They're going to plead guilty to a crime. They're going to get their sentence, and they're going to walk out the same door it came in. And that's it. What we're doing now is we're stopping them as they come out, and we're letting them know you have fees and fines coming, and Bob is going to be sending you a letter to tell you what those fees and fines are. That had never happened before. I came over and surveyed our court before I even got elected and watched the system. And I determined after coming over and doing an audit that there was a systemic problem. And this was my fix for that. So now, within 3 days, they are getting a letter from me telling them exactly where their court fees and fines are. I've worked with the probation officer over here, Charles, and he and I are working well together. He does not let people off of probation, parole, or any of that stuff until their court fees and fines are paid. And I've got folks coming in who are on probation that are paying their fees and fines well before they're coming off of probation. So they don't want anything to stop that. They want to know that when their day comes, they're walking out clean. And it's working. The next thing I'm going to do, and I just pushed this off, is to streamline our jury summons system. I want to go to a web-based system, okay? And it's going to integrate the county. It's going to require me to integrate with the county website that we have, okay? So then I have 4 options of potential jury candidates, okay? First things first, when it comes to you, when it comes to you in the mail, you can scan that barcode or whatever you have there. What do they call that thing? QR code. Scan that QR code, and they go on their phone, and they can do all of their jury information in there. And they can't leave it until they put the stuff that I need in there. Because I spend a lot of time calling people and asking them, hey, you didn't fill out this, you didn't fill out that. You don't leave me a phone number, then now we got a problem. And we've been having those problems. I cut those down to next to nothing. With this system, we'll cut it down to 0 simply because you can't even send it in until you fill in these blocks. We'll make it mandatory. The second option is to go ahead and fill it out online. And that's where the computer, the web-based intercept there. It's immediate. The next one is you can do what we're doing now. You can fill it out, you can put it in an envelope, and you can mail it to us. And then the last thing is, a lot of folks like to do this, they come right into the courthouse and give it to us, and we check it off and do all that stuff. Either way, it's going to make it much more efficient. A good friend of mine down in one of the counties went to this system, and in the first month, he's cut his error rates and all that stuff down to about 4%. So very few errors in this thing, and the communications left and right from the potential juror to the court is just next to nothing. It's non-existent. Money savings, we're going to save a lot of money on postage. We spend, it costs us about $98 to mail out jury summons. And we've got 8 more trial weeks coming up before the end of the year. So you take 125 times that, and to some people that don't seem like a lot of money. To our court system, it is a lot of money, okay? And every penny I can save, we save. They pickle me over there because I turn lights off when I go outside of a room. I go in or out of a room. I turn them off. And I tell them right now, after everybody left the courtroom, we turned off all the lights. That's just being responsible, I think, to our taxpayers. And we're going to continue to do that. Right now, we have an outstanding staff. You will never, ever hear me say anything negative about these folks. Staff over there, they're just fantastic. We've got a part-timer that helps. That part-timer will outperform anyone. I put her up against anyone that has a full-time job in our staff and anybody else's staff. She is someone that we really need to retain. And my goal is to somehow work out in the budget this year to retain her. I know we have a lot of challenges and everything, and we have priorities that are probably a lot higher, but she just needs to be on our staff full-time. If we can get her on our staff full-time, I can promise you that as long as I'm clerk of court, I will not ever ask for another full-time position to be filled over there, period. We don't need it. 5 staff members, we'll do it. Right now, our courthouse is running as efficient as it's ever run that I know of. And I can show you data, I can show you money that we're collecting, I can show you a lot of things, but we are being very, very proficient. We've actually got people calling us asking our opinions now, if you can believe that. Having that new person, that new full-time staff member is going to facilitate our increased operations tempo. That's a military term, op tempo, for our courts. For example, we've got eight of those trial weeks finishing up this year. And we've got the potential, because it's all talk until money's in the hand, but a creation of a veterans court is in the play. Anybody ever heard of a veterans court? Specifically directed towards veterans. There's a lot of resources available to veterans that are not available to the civilian population. And what they've done is they've harnessed that and put it into a veterans court. They're doing that down in Charleston. They're doing it down in Dorchester. And the public defenders and I have been speaking about that. And that's his goal, to get that thing going. And this is a wonderful place to do it. We have a large veterans population here, but also we're a small courthouse. It's a very relaxed courthouse. It's a very relaxed atmosphere for you to deal with folks who are dealing with the problems that they deal with, that they come up with. And a lot of PTSD issues are involved with the veterans court and things like that. So a lot of social issues will be dealt with there. With that, I'm not going to bore you with all this other stuff. I was bad enough being late, but if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Thank you, Mr. Block. Anyone?
Yeah, how you get Sumter County to work with you? In all my years with the schools, Sumter County was like, they wouldn't do anything but anything.
Jamie Campbell and I go meet people. I like them. They like me. Maybe maybe I pay them too much, I don't know. Jamie and I, we've got some issues going that we may have to go the legislative route to try to fix it. And that has to do with these fees and fines. Yeah, it's my goal to have it set to where the judge can actually sentence you to, whatever, probation or whatever. But I want them, right now the judges are saying, some of them are saying, they're saying that that's an administrative action. Collecting that money is an administrative action. But I believe if a judge looked a defendant in the eye and says, you're going to owe fees and fines, see that fellow right there, you need to pay him. And with that being done, no one can walk out of that courtroom and say, I didn't know I had fees and fines. That's one fix. Russell Ott and I have talked, and Jeff Zell. We're going to have more talks about that stuff. And let's just see if we can make it a better system. We may have to go through the legislative side of the to do it, and I may be whistling Dixie. We don't know. We'll see. We'll see how that goes. But Sumter County, actually, yeah, we have a lot of respect for them, and they have a lot of respect for us in the courthouse here. Now, they did say something about the school system, and I ain't gonna tell you what they said about you.
No, I really don't care what they say about me. But that being said, I'm just saying that their superintendent never participated in anything that our local area did. And, but actually, I kind of understand why, because a bunch of them went to jail and all kinds of stuff.
We do have friends over there in the court system. We really do, and they're very, very, very good folks. And I use that to train, getting cross training and stuff. Florence County is another one. I have a good rapport there, and I will probably be sending somebody over there in ROD section to get some additional perspective, and also Aiken County.
I do have one question,
Yes, sir.
but I don't want to answer now.
Okay.
Out of that $1.78 million, what percentage of it do you think we'd ever collect? Just think about it. I don't want to put you on the spot.
My personal goal is 15%.
Okay.
If I get 20%, you and I are gonna go drink a beer, okay? However, I will buy.
Okay.
If I get 20%, I'm gonna be a hero to a lot of folks. I'm already talking to other counties. They think it's great what I'm doing, and I'm already talking to other counties. How do you do this? They have a debt set-off collection program that we have, but last year we only collected $400 from people's taxes. Okay, and that's where I got to saying, I got to do something about this. So I write spreadsheets, and I know how to do that kind of stuff. I send letters out, and I don't care what they say about my mama, because my mama's no longer here. However, if you do the crime, pay your dime. I really have no sympathy for folks who owe money, and I don't care. I can't delineate between someone who's owed it for a year or someone who's owed it for 25 years. It's in our computer system and in the database, and that's what they owe. And technically, it is still on their records forever. If you want to know where your permanent record is, when you were a kid, I was always told, you better straighten up, it's going to go on your permanent record. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I know where your permanent record is. I see it every day. And it's there. And if you owe money to the court system in the state of South Carolina, it never comes off until we send you a receipt saying you owe absolutely nothing. 15%, sweet. 20, fantastic. If I do more than that, I'm going to run for governor.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brock.
Thank you.
Anybody else have anything more? Thank you, sir. Good report. Next, we have Attorney Lawrence Flynn, Fire Department audit findings.
Hey guys, happy Monday.
Hello.
So I was requested by staff in the aftermath of the consolidation, which is kind of hard to believe. We're coming up on a year of that consolidation since we were last year going through that process. And in the subsequent kind of period to moving the new operations, consolidating fire departments, as y'all now recognize, we have individual fire service agreements with the remaining fire service departments that have elected to contract with the county. And as a result of that, there are certain parameters in those original fire contracts that require some reporting functions. And so we thought it would be a really good idea now that we've kind of gotten our feet under us to bring in a third-party CPA to do not necessarily a forensic audit, because that's a much deeper, in-depth process, but and I'm not an accountant, obviously y'all know that, I'm a lawyer, but to do a dive, basically to do kind of like test the edges, and not necessarily an audit, but what they call an agreed upon procedures arrangement. And so for the 6 original fire departments, the 5 remaining operating fire departments, and the 6 that is now defunct, requests were sent out by Mr. Steve Blake, and he did a year-over-year review of calendar year end December 24 against calendar year end December 25. So all of those departments were operating over that same period of time, except for Sandy Run, which ceased its operations on July 1st of last year when the contract was completed. And so through that process, which was entirely voluntary, because until we had the new agreements, the county didn't have any mandated obligations on reporting functions. And most of the departments, made the best efforts to comply. But in the process of going through it, it exposed some, I would say, concerning reporting methodologies, some things about just the basic operations of running a department that I think a lot of the operating staff were just not frankly aware of. I don't think that that's particular evidence of fraud or misconduct. I think on many of the circumstances, it simply was they just didn't know any better. And so the record keeping, I think, and most of this seems to come back to the same consideration, the record keeping was really poor. The alternative to that, though, and what I think Steve Blake at your county will ultimately tell you, is that you can also use poor record keeping as an excuse to do things that you're trying to otherwise get away with and hide the ball, and you may not know what's out there. So in the absence of doing a full-blown forensic audit or mandating some type of compliance, which you really only have the ability to do with 5 of the remaining, the 5 contractual fire departments that you currently do service through, because I will say through a litany of attempts working through the attorney for Sandy Run, we did it on a voluntary basis. They responded back saying, what obligations do we have as a C3 to provide responsive data? And the short answer is we don't, because we didn't have a contractual arrangement to mandate that they provide us anything. So to this point, the AUP process was really not fulfilled with respect to Sandy Run, because we didn't ever get any access to any of their accounts or other functions. At the end of the day, you're no longer providing contractual fire service fees, but it is obviously an outstanding issue and one that we've been unable to address through the AUP. So I think largely what I'm going to discuss are the 5 remaining departments that are out there. Anything that we want to do with Sandy Run or that y'all attempt to do with Sandy Run, I think is probably going to just raise the discussion back up again, and that's ultimately y'all's discretion if you want to. But with the remaining 5, the kind of the summary, and I put this together in a memo. I'm sure it was shared with y'all. I don't want to read this line by line, but I certainly want to hit some of the highlights of what was identified. And so the thing I think that I want to make sure we work through is you identify what the discrepancies are based on the AUP. And then we identify what potential legal issues that may cause and how we address them is I think the kind of core function of what I want to have. I'm not a solicitor. I'm not a criminal defense lawyer. To the extent there's any criminality, which I don't believe there is, that needs to be turned over to the appropriate investigative bodies to be able to make a determination if there's anything there. But at a really high level, the things that they otherwise identified were that not all departments were forthcoming about their cash positions and statements. I think in reading back through the AUP, some of it was just simply the bookkeeping was just not very good. They didn't have appropriate account names. They didn't have current statements. They didn't know where they were registered. They didn't have access to online banking. Most all of the departments had 2 separate accounts. There was one that had 3, but it was generally their general operating account, which is the one that you fund with your contractual service payment, and then their 1% money. And the 1% money is something that you don't have oversight over, but there are some state law requirements that are otherwise required to comply with that I don't think are necessarily being met in all circumstances. And we can get back to what some of those enforcement mechanisms may look like. Certain vehicles and other assets were missing or not otherwise reported. Y'all may remember under the agreements that we signed, a master register of all assets needed to be maintained and updated annually. That hasn't been done in many cases at this point. Any of the county-funded fire apparatus, we believe we've identified, we believe we have pulled those back over, and then we're serving them effectively under a lease agreement, but to the extent that they have acquired some asset with grant funds or with debt financing that they otherwise took out that is in the name of that particular department, all of those should be properly registered. It should be pretty easy to pull VIN numbers on the assets and provide you with a working register. Frankly, I don't know how you do that. If you can't provide that, I don't know how you necessarily insure it. And so that's a major concern. One of the departments in particular, which was Midway, doesn't own the land underlying the fire station, and there was no evidence of an underlying lease to give them the rights to provide access to that facility. And so from a very technical legal standpoint, in the absence of a lease and in the absence of proper ownership, they're not legally operating out of the fire station. So we need to identify who owns the underlying fee parcel and either make arrangements for the asset to be transferred to that department, to the county, or at least enter into a lease that allows you to provide operations out of that facility. And I think that needs to be a consideration that is identified as part of the kind of responsive next steps when we renew these contracts. All of the departments, at least that we were able to identify both through the AUP process and then separately through my review with the Secretary of State, all of them were registered as state law nonprofits. And so that's a pretty easy process, right? You can go to the Secretary of State, they have standardized forms for being a nonprofit. You can either do that online or you can file them independently, and there is a history there. And they'll say, this is an entity that's otherwise in good standing, and it just simply means that you haven't revoked. But that doesn't mean they're updating their service register. It doesn't mean that they've updated bylaws. It certainly doesn't mean that they're independently filing tax returns. Remember, they are exempt from income taxes for both state and federal law purposes, but they are still required to file income tax returns as a nonprofit entity to the extent that I believe the threshold, and we can confirm this with Steve, is more than $50,000. So any of the departments that receive more than $50,000 a year in funding are required to file a federal 990 form, which is the tax exempt, or excuse me, the federal income tax filing for a tax exempt entity, and the IRS maintains a track of that. To our knowledge, no one had done that. What was especially disconcerting is that one of the entities, in particular, Jumper Fire Station, and also I believe that Sandy Run at one time had their 501c3 status. We weren't able to identify anything with that either. But Jumper did have a 501c3. So you have to think of this as they're state law nonprofits. And then separately, 501c3 is the designation of the federal income tax code identified in section 501c that identifies them as a federally tax exempt entity. And you may ask yourself, well, why would you be a state law nonprofit and a federal nonprofit? Well, if you're a federal nonprofit, a lot of times it also makes you available to receive certain federal grant dollars and makes you a more attractive candidate for people to get donations to you. And so there's a reporting function associated with maintaining that 501c3 status. You do not have to have it. And frankly, knowing the paperwork and the record keeping here, I would generally recommend that unless they were going out there and actively soliciting additional funds under a charitable giving arrangement, there's probably not a ton of benefit to be retained from receiving a C3 status. But Jumper, because they didn't file their 990s for 3 consecutive years, starting in 2020, had their 501c3 status automatically revoked, which is the standard from the IRS. If you do not file your 990 on a timely basis for 3 consecutive years, it automatically results in a revocation of the C3 status. So I think there's some documentation and some bookkeeping functions that we may also want to think about incorporating into our contracts to make sure that we actually see a copy of their federal tax return that they're filing with the IRS on a timely basis, which could be part of also a limited process for doing not necessarily a full-blown audit, but something along the lines of these AUPs every year to make sure that there is proper accounting on the monies that they're receiving and the identification and use of the 1% money. And so that's kind of the high level of all the things that were identified by the AUP status. So all of those things can create risk, right? So if you don't have appropriate reporting functions on the assets that you have, if you don't know who your proper signatories are, if you're not properly checking your regular accounts, if you're not filing tax returns, and you're giving them county-funded tax dollars to run their operations, Once you give it to them, it's deemed spent by state law purposes. So once they receive it, if they're using it, they're intended to use it for their purpose. But that also subjects them to FOIA. It also subjects them, generally speaking, to your procurement code. So what I would suggest, to the extent that's not happening, and I know there's some oversight and some functions that we're still working through to kind of figure out exactly what the best process is. If the standard county procurement practices don't work for them, we probably need to think through a process for identifying standalone procurement efforts to make it easier for them to otherwise comply. I would also say that to the extent we've identified things in the particular fire contracts, and so we've identified all of those in the agreement. So making these reports, not having a policy that conflicts with county policy, not purchasing fire apparatus or assets in excess of $1,000 without your approval, not taking on any debt, complying with county ordinances and resolutions, and basically providing information on a timely basis as requested, including, budget obligations as you go into your budget cycle, which would otherwise be occurring now. And then maintaining and completing that list of fire apparatus and other equipment. There are a lot of things in that list that are not being met currently with the fire agreements that are there. So what are the corrective actions that you otherwise take? Well, for the ones that, are egregiously bad and just can't do it, this is the way we set ourselves up. You consolidate a fire service into a consolidated taxing entity. You're doing these contracts on a year-over-year basis. We have the directive authority to hold them to account. If they're not fulfilling their duties, the result is you could say, we're not going to contract with you anew. That's an egregious step. That it would be the termination of an existing fire agreement or the non-renewal of an existing agreement and assigning that service territory to one of the existing volunteer nonprofits or potentially one of the municipal providers that also operate within the county. So that's kind of the worst case scenario, if you will, is that if they just can't cut the mustard, then you need to otherwise decide whether you're going to cut them loose. And that's ultimately a council decision as to who you want to contract with. But when you're assigning county dollars to provide those functions, it's a direct reflection of this county because they're showing up to your service calls, and you need to be able to hold them to account on money. And that's one of the things I think has been consistent throughout this, is that there's just not real good reporting and there's not real good transparency on the information that we're receiving out of them, even when they want to be compliant. Making sure that all the real property is identified and in the names of the appropriate parties. Jumper needs to have, Midway needs to have either ownership of that property or a lease agreement in place that gives them the authorization to operate it out of that facility. They need to make sure that they have timely 990s. That absolutely needs to happen every single year. And to the extent they are receiving any charitable funds, even if they're not a qualified 501c3, which is if I write a check to the Jumper Station Fire Department and I want to write it off on my taxes, they can't issue me a tax receipt because they're not a federal nonprofit. But if I want to just give it to them and I take the risk there, they still need to report those charitable givings through the state's Charitable Funds Act. And I don't believe that's happening either. We talked about procurement a little bit, making sure that they're compliant with procurement, making sure they understand ethics obligations on contracting with other departments. Only bring that up because that's happened a couple of times, not here in the county, but places that I've identified where an assistant fire chief also is a member of a buying cooperative, and he winds up contracting with his buddies in another neighboring department, and those ethics issues are not otherwise disclosed. Just something to make sure you're obviously paying attention to. And then I think a follow-on to that is making sure that training is ultimately occurring as well. That's not really a function, but some of those are obviously the requirements that you're going to have to maintain for insurance purposes and obviously certification purposes through the appropriate enforcement bodies. And then ultimately, as we get back to it, what the kind of in conclusion, to the extent we do discover evidence of fraud, that needs to be turned over to the appropriate authorities to take the next and appropriate actions as you see fit. Right now, the books and records are not strong enough to really determine whether anything occurred. And then to the extent that we move into this next set of contracts and we renew it and we have this same conversation a year from now that people are not compliant, I would think long and hard about potentially not renewing those contracts with the non-compliant departments. So that's a really, really high level kind of overview of, I think, where the AEP shook out, what this memo is otherwise kind of putting on the table. and I'll certainly answer any questions that y'all may have.
Richard, Ken, y'all got any questions?
I probably do, but that was pretty, that was a lot to take in. Like I say, I really didn't think you would go, I really felt like you were gonna find about what you were reporting. Because, like I said in a previous meeting, there's a lot more record keeping and all kind of stuff that I feel like they have the expertise to do within those departments. So, it's not it's hard to get a volunteer type person to do the amount of work that's required to do that.
And I think that's a larger consideration here, right? You got departments that they didn't get into firefighting and
No.
run a bunch of paperwork.
No.
And so I think we recognize that. And so if you want to be a professional firefighter or a semi-professional volunteer firefighter, the idea of working through the process, these are going to be some of the requirements. And so that's a consideration the council also needs to determine. If it's a fire service coordinator that helps administer and run all those paperwork obligations and requires some type of monthly reporting obligations to be able to make it easier on them, those are considerations that I think council needs to direct the staff to give them some directive authority to take some actions. But the good news is that we've at least identified what the issues are. And so, the next step is once you've identified the issues, is how do you correct them and how do you go through the process of making people held accountable for a continued failure to comply once you've identified those issues.
All right, so, it almost sounds like to me that this needs to be consolidated back into, and that's what it sounds like you're saying, that the fire coordinator.
No, I don't think I'm necessarily saying that. I think there needs to be some degree of continuing response and accountability where you're spending county tax dollars.
Right.
They're your dollars, that you were elected by, the folks in this community to provide the highest quality of services that you could otherwise receive. In the absence of the county getting into the business and saying, we're not contracting with anyone else, which is a very expensive endeavor, when you've got the network in place, you can continue to make arrangements with that network.
Yeah.
But that network needs to be held accountable to the same standards that anyone else operating a fire department in South Carolina would otherwise be held to. And, it sounds like it's a lot, but the idea of simply saying, hey, you're receiving public dollars, you should be able to account for those dollars. You should be able to show us where your money is spent. You should be able to provide us online access to the records. You should have an inventory of the assets that you receive. When you start thinking about it at some of those levels, it's not, this is stuff that you can't run your personal life like that. You certainly can't run a business like that.
Well, having gone through the asset part, chain of custody becomes an issue with an asset, to be truthful with you. At one point they wanted to make us with the schools account for every desk and every computer and everything like that, which meant when you hired a substitute teacher or when the custodian goes into the room, you can no longer hold the teacher accountable for what's in the room because you've lost chain of custody. So, having been S4 for an Army unit, Bob, Bob is an old retired helicopter pilot. I know what happens when somebody takes the bolt cutters and cuts the lock. Then the chain of custody has been broken and you can no longer hold a person who has the key responsible for it. So it
But
becomes.
what you can do, if you've identified that there's an inventory of those
Right.
assets and it's insured, you can at least tell your insurance provider.
Right.
We lost
Right.
this.
Right,
So
yeah,
depending
yeah,
on
you're
becomes
right, yeah.
Less important if it's insured.
Right, yeah. Well, like I say, there's a lot, that's what you just said in 5-10 minutes or whatever, there's a lot of meat in that to be digested. I guess what I'm saying is, you got to sit down and think about it. And back to your statement about people who volunteer to be firefighters are not generally accountants or whatever, or wanting to do accounting.
Sure.
So
And
it's,
I think to the extent the county can standardize as many of these processes for reporting, where if you say, look, here's a quarterly, reconciliation report, we want to see this from you. That's something that can likely be sourced internally with the county. And if it's not responsive, at least then you're not waiting a year to find out that you're having issues. You have an issue 3 months in. And if you say, hey, your calendar year ends in December, you should be able to have your financial, your tax return completed and turned into the IRS by the renewal period, right around this period of time. Like, that's an April 15th deadline. Those are things that are pretty standardized. And I think you can say, we can
Yeah,
even include
I
as a
understand.
copy, a copy of the contract. We have all these recitals, but if we wanted to add a supplement to those annual contracts and said, here is a list of absolute must-haves in order for you to renew your contract next year. And it may take non-renewing someone's contract to prove that you're serious. But you got to make that, that y'all are the elected body that gets to make that decision. I can only kind of point you in the direction.
you've done this numerous times. I think was why we brought you on board. Surely you've run into similar situations in the past.
Yeah, there is, you can look, there's news articles everywhere, and I would impress upon you to go home and Google them. But fire consolidation was a real thing, and it's happening all over the state.
Right.
And it's simply a result of, and it's unique here, right? Because this is still a very rural county, and you've got, lots of service area to cover with not a ton of density and not a lot of assets to support it. And so what we see in a lot of communities is it's a bit of a Robin Hood principle, right? Where you're taking a more dense, well-to-do fire district, and you, as county council, are consolidating them into a less well-to-do or more rural county, because what it allows you to do is spread those assets among a larger population. That's really not an answer here, because it's not like you can say, hey, let's move, these two entities together, because effectively what you're doing is adding two entities that don't have a whole bunch together. But if you have entities that are showing that they do have the ability to be responsive, and that it can be, they have someone who's a really good bookkeeper, and they have someone who can do the paperwork and maybe even likes that, maybe there's some commonality that you can figure out through some of that. But I think some very basic reporting functions are not above the call, and it should be just an absolute standard as a requirement for anyone that's going to sign a contract.
Just thought, Richard, give me your take on some of this, if you don't mind.
So, yes, sir.
Because you're the administrator that we're going to look to.
So there's a couple things I think here. We since the time that we went through this process, we no longer write checks to departments and give them operational funds, and then they have an accounting of it. They submit all the invoices and they go through finance and procurement. So we've addressed that piece to there. I think what I'd like to do is get y'all's permission to work with Attorney Flynn and come back with recommendations on what needs to be added or changed in the ordinance or in the contracts to identify. So they're submitting invoices for all taxpayer funded stuff. But what Lawrence is talking about is, donations that they've received, other outside funding entities that may not come through us, that are making up a picture of everything that they do. Because while they are not technically the county, they are operating as an agent of the county. It reflects on the county. And anytime you're getting, grants or other donations, there needs to be an accounting of that, and that needs to be transparent. We've got all of the agreed upon procedures. We've got the lack of information from the old Sandy Run Fire Department. We've sent that information to the solicitor's office. There's nothing we can do. As he said, we didn't have a contract for 40 some odd years laying out rules for them to receive this money. So there's nothing that we can do, or our internal auditor or our attorney can do to compel them to turn over that information. We don't know like you said, we don't know if anything was done right, wrong, or indifferent, because we don't have access to it. And so all of that information, anything that we weren't able to gather access to from any department, will be handed off to the correct authorities for them to try to figure that out. But what we can do, as he alluded to, is we can work to come back to council with recommendations on what needs to be changed. You know, when we talk about what it could look like potentially, we already have a methodology in place, because our Red Rock Fire Department that covers the old Sandy Run Fire District area is a volunteer department of the county. They don't have a board. They don't have anything separate. They are a fully volunteer department of the county. We didn't take anything operational away from them. We didn't do any of that. They function day-to-day operationally just like any other department does, but they do everything paperwork-wise through the county. They don't take donations. They don't file for grants on their own. They don't have a separate nonprofit establishment. So there is a method for those departments that either choose not to go through the hassle of all that work, or either don't have the capacity to do so without us taking anything away from them operational. They can still operate as a volunteer fire department. They can still do everything. They signed up to be firefighters. They have committed a large portion of their life and their time and dedication to do this. And they can continue to do that. We just take all of the, the stuff that nobody likes to do. That's what we do. And so there is a path forward for that based on what the feedback is from those departments. But if we can work with the fire departments, with the attorney, come back to council with recommendations on what we do for those remaining departments moving forward, we have turned the rest of this over, and we'll pass it on to what other entities that it needs to go to, and let those entities that are the investigative bodies do their piece, because that's not what we do.
On our, I guess, do we have this is not any just minor undertaking. For what Lawrence is describing, it's really pretty complicated. And it requires, you don't find people every day that can do these kind of things. I see it done every day with my wife. And it's really,
Yes, typically somebody that doesn't have somebody with that skill set is going to hire a CPA standalone. They're basically going to do a single audit every year.
Well, I'm talking about the 990 and all that kind of stuff. You've got to keep meticulous records in order to be able to complete that. And I guess what I'm saying is, do we have the staff? We're in budget time now. Do we have the staff that if they were to say, well, we can't do that, it needs to be done at the county level, do we have the staff to do that?
We don't. So if they decide they don't want to do that, we don't do any of that. We have our audit that covers. If that happens, we don't have to file a 990 for each one of those departments.
I understand
because that all goes away. We have our own auditing requirements that our auditor does, but we don't file a 990 for each department. We're a state nonprofit.
Yeah, I
entity,
understand
so
that. Yeah.
yes, we have the capacity to do so. Yes.
Okay. That's all.
And if the question is, can we handle it? Yes, we can.
You can. Okay.
But we're not gonna solve this problem tonight. I want the commission, Ken and Richard
Yeah.
and you and the attorney to really handle this instead of the whole council trying to handle
Yes,
this
sir.
tonight.
If you
We're
want,
not
I
gonna-
can get with the attorney. We can get some stuff together. Then we can have a commission, the subcommittee meeting.
Yeah, I think y'all need to do that. Come back and report to council, and then we'll.
Yes, sir.
Richard, one thing when you're meeting with Lawrence, let's come up with a Word document of everything, or either Excel spreadsheet of everything they realistically need to provide that we need to have. So they'll know what they're working off of instead of just talking about it.
They've been given that.
I know, but I don't need a 12-page report. I'm talking about a one-sheet piece of paper. But hey, you need to do this, boom, 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 need these bullet points versus the whole report. And so, hey, let's go down each one line by
We have
line.
that. Yes,
Okay, that's good.
Yeah, we have that.
So-
That was given to them. The report is what was brought back from those requests.
Okay.
Yes, but we will have that. We'll get together and get that for you as well.
I just want to thank Lawrence for you giving us the advice to make this move, as we were asking you earlier, like you said last year. None of this comes to a surprise. It doesn't to me, just because, like we said, the volunteers departments didn't have the capacity for whatever reason. But now moving forward, we put in with the hired coordinator and the other hired fire staff, we have the means to move forward. So I mean, I don't think it's a surprise. It's just the way, like I said, it's been done all over the state. And so we plan on moving forward and helping these departments because we certainly still need volunteers. And I don't want any of the volunteer departments thinking that we're coming in to try to take over, but it's just something that needed to be done and has needed to be done. So I want to thank you.
Anybody else reckon anything? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No more appearances, yeah, down to resolution 4-2026, April as Fair Housing Month.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Fair housing resolution, whereas Calhoun County desires that all its citizens be afforded the opportunity to attain a decent, safe, and sound living environment. And whereas Calhoun County rejects discrimination on the basis of race, religion, color, sex, national origin, disability, and/or familial status in the sale, rental, or provision of other housing services. And whereas the state of South Carolina enacted the South Carolina Fair Housing Law in 1989, and whereas April is recognized nationally as Fair Housing Month, now therefore be it resolved that Calhoun County does hereby designate April as Fair Housing Month, adopted this 13th day of April 2026 by Calhoun County.
We have a motion for adoption of that resolution.
So moved.
Second.
Properly moved and second that we adopt the fair housing resolution. Any further discussion? All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed likewise, the ayes have it. Down to old business, Wild Rose Lane.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. So there'd been a couple calls. It's been a couple months since we talked about Wild Rose Lane, and Vice Chairman Thornton was reached out by a citizen, and I actually received 2 calls this week as well on it, or last week, I should say. And just wanted to give a quick update. Our attorney, Michael Montgomery, has reached out to the landowner attorney and DOT's attorney. They were supposed to meet on Thursday last week. They didn't get to. But the short answer is that it's playing its course. There is no change. There is still no, we don't believe that the road is going to be closed. And so we expect the road to be open. We've communicated with the landowner and DOT's attorney that if there were things that were concerns on the landowner's part, we talked about a couple months ago, some extra patrols, the ability to temporarily close the road if they needed to burn the fields on each side, and some things like that were the property owner's main concerns. And so we don't anticipate that there'll be any change or that the road will close. It's just got to go through its course and follow the proper court procedures. The signs are still up and they're required to be up until the proceedings are done.
I think we already passed a resolution. We did something that the
Yes,
county
sir.
was in favor of not closing the road, but the final decision will not be ours. So we just want the public to know that.
So I was under the impression that the landowner was kind of backing off on it. Is the landowner still pursuing it?
No, so the landowner just wanted to be able to do certain things that we didn't think needed the road to be closed and abandoned. And that was what I had hoped to have the update on. I don't have the details on that,
I
but
got you.
we don't expect the road to move forward on closing. In order for it to do so, it would have to be adjudicated in court. And as the chairman mentioned, we already, council passed a
Yeah,
resolution.
I knew we had done that, but I was under the impression that kind of that thing.
That is what we believe to be the case, yes, sir.
Okay. No more old business. We down to new business. RFP 2518 water storage tank maintenance.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. So there was an RFP issued, a request for proposals for a long-term tank maintenance contract to provide inspection, interior and exterior cleaning, painting, disinfection, engineering services, and emergency services for the county's elevated water tanks. These are very expensive pieces of infrastructure that I guess it's probably been about 3 years ago. We had to repaint the tank on the I-26, and it was about $200,000. And then there's routine maintenance that happens that gets to be real expensive. So the water department, working with procurement, put out an RFP to get a maintenance contract for 10 years. The maintenance contract would include the painting of the tanks inside and out, all the regular maintenance service, everything to keep it up to date with DES. We got 2 proposals, one from Southern Corrosion and one from American Tank. The 2 proposals were presented in a little bit different formats. One was a initial price with a CPI, and the other one was a fixed rate. Working with the finance office and procurement, they evaluated the 2 and determined that the proposal from Southern Corrosion would save the county $44,000 over the 10 years. They've gone through, evaluated proposals, make sure they were apples to apples, make sure that the types of paint, the number of cleanings and inspections and all that are equal. And so procurement is recommending that we award the contract to Southern Corrosion for that process. It is expected to be $784,381 over that 10-year period. But CPI, we don't know what CPI is. That's based on the weighted factor annually, but that should be what it costs that's based on a 3% CPI rolled in over 10 years, which should be on the high side, typically minus the last 5 years when we had the COVID CPI is typically sub 2% over a 10-year rolling period.
So do we need to?
So you're requesting for Southern Corrosion for $784,381?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we contract with Southern Corrosions for above groundwater tanks or whatever maintenance in the amount of $784,381 for the next 10 years.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Probably moving second. Any further discussion? All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, likewise, the ayes have it. Thank you, Richard. Request to cease maintenance on Marshall Road. Richard, where is that at? I mean,
This at Camp Daniels, the South
Yes.
Carolina State process there. And so, Mr. Chairman, it is part of South Carolina State's, and you've got the letter in your packet from South Carolina State. Some of their grant dollars and security improvements that they're doing there require them to make that road a private drive, and it's going to be gated. And so they're asking the county to abandon maintenance on Marshall Road. Marshall Road accesses through the campus and ties back into Nance Drive, which is a private road on the back side that we don't maintain. And so I asked them, and they wanted to make sure, I wanted to make sure that the people that lived in the back were still going to have access to their property freely. And so they're going to be granted access with key card access. We got them to commit to that.
So this will begin at Old River Road and they'll take that whole
Yes,
road over?
yes, sir. We typically maintain just the Marshall piece at about just before the dam.
Damn, yeah.
Yes, sir. And then, so they're asking, they want to take it out of the system. And so the request comes to council to abandon that. They're going to take over maintenance of that.
Is there any implication on, is that a state, is that in the state system
No,
currently?
sir, it's just in ours.
Just in the county
Yes.
system? Mr. Chairman, I move that we pass the request, approve the request to cease maintenance on Marshall Road.
Second.
probably moving second. Any further discussion on ceasing maintenance on Marshall Road? All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, likewise, the ayes have it. Okay, anything else on the new business, Rich?
No, sir.
Okay. Down to ordinances, ordinance 2026-2. First reading the ordinance to amend chapter 2, article 5 of the Calhoun County Code of Ordinances to allow for amendments to the Calhoun County Procurement Code.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. So what this is this is really tied to the EOC project, which we'll talk about in a minute. But we did the RFP and we had received proposals for the new EOC facility. And during that process, we had a protest of the award, the recommended award that council approved several months ago. And so at the outcome of this, I asked Michael Montgomery, our attorney, to review our procurement code and make sure there was anything we needed to tweak to kind of prevent this in the future. We went through the process. It's actually been reviewed by both us, the federal level procurement and SLED, the state procurement. They all agreed we did everything we were supposed to do. But so these are recommendations from Michael to kind of clean up the language, make it clear that what we did was the proper way to do it. One other correction in there was that under the contract, we updated the procurement code, I think 2 years ago. And there was a section in there that talked about department heads having authority up to $500, but that was contractual related, and the department heads don't have the authority to sign a contract for the county. And so he recommended that we change that wording, and so that's been updated, and those are the changes that you have.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we give first reading to ordinance 2026-2.
Second.
Properly moving second that we give first reading to ordinance 2026-2. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, likewise, the ayes have it. Okay. Ordinance 2026-3, first reading, an ordinance to amend chapter 20 of the Calhoun County Code of Ordinances regarding the creation and duties of the Economic Development Cooperation.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. So there was a request or a question several months ago about the authority of the Economic Development Commission. We asked our attorney to review it, make sure that he felt like it met all the state statutes. During that review, he has made some recommendations on updating the ordinance. The first part of that is to remove some language. The ordinance still said, we call it the Economic Development Commission if that name was available to be registered at the state. And there was language in there about approving purchase of the property that really should have never been codified. So he recommended to take those out. And then he's added under section 21-32, he's identified all of the powers of the Economic Development Corporation and identified what is allowed by state law to clarify that. And those are the two changes there.
Okay, may I have a motion for approval?
So moved.
Second.
Properly moving second that we approve first reading on ordinance 2026-3. Any further discussion? All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, likewise, the ayes have it. Okay, Richard, we down to you.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman, a couple quick things. The Purple Martin Festival is coming up this week. Friday night's the street dance. Saturday will be the parade and festival. Senator Zell is their grand marshal, and Lieutenant Governor Pamela Vett is also going to be there with him at the parade. We had our litter pickup, the first one we have of the year. We typically have it twice a year with county employees. On Thursday of last week, we had 38 employees participate in it from between 2 to 4 hours of time picking up trash. Picked up 107 bags of trash in that time. So really great turnout and a lot of trash picked up on that. So we're very well pleased with that. Zoning updates we've talked about. We've done a lot of advertising, a lot of posting. We had a public input session. We had one member show up. We had basically received no questions or requests until Lawrence posted that we got the map with the changes that have come in, and then he got about a half a dozen requests right after that. That's going to be going to the Planning Commission this month for them to review those map changes, and then it should be coming to you next month. That information is still posted on the county site. You can still click on the link and go do that. Last week, also on Thursday, we received 2 fire trucks that council approved and we ordered back in 2023. One for Belleville and one for Call. That's just the time frame it takes to get these vehicles built now. And so those came in last week. Hopefully those will be in service 10 days to 2 weeks, and they should be on the road responding to calls in those 2 departments. And that should free up getting rid of some of the older equipment, reducing some of that other equipment that we've got. The audit, I had hoped that we were going to have the audit presented to you tonight. We didn't quite get there. We should have the final audit received and submitted to the state by the end of this week, and he is on the agenda to come present the audit to you on the next council meeting. So we're excited about that. Still not quite where we wanted to be, but we're about 6 months ahead of where we were last year and about 9 months ahead of where we were the year before. So making great strides in that. Some of the changes and the policies and procedures that we put in place are really starting to pay off. So we're happy about that. I mentioned the EOC. Council several months ago approved not to exceed number for the EOC. That was a little over $2.7 million. We finalized all the VE and the owner purchased items, and that number is going to be closer to 2.45. So we're happy about what we were able to save on that and do. We expect that we should have a pre-construction meeting sometime in the next 3 to 4 weeks. Get that started. You should hopefully start to see some progress going on over there. Right now, they're estimating about 300 days for construction schedule. So just a little bit past the end of this year, and hopefully the EOC will be operational. So we're excited about that. Something that Dave Chinaki, our EMA director, has been working on for a number of years, and it was a competitive proposal. We were the only one in the state to get that award 2 years ago. So we're glad that that's finally getting there. It was held up at the federal level and then released and held up again and then held up at the state level. We finally moved through all that and all the final approvals, everything released. That was a $1.7 million grant with a match of about $500,000 on the county side. So that'll be a nice new EOC there. And that's all I've got, Jim.
Okay, the council. Okay. Motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
Properly moved second. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, likewise. I'm going to take, he went back to work.